Hi everybody, Jason here from AV Pro Edge, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm very happy to have on our guest from Lumagen, Jim Peterson. How you doing, Jim?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
Great, nice to hear from you. So for those of you who are listening, Jim Peterson is from a company called Lumagen. They make some very nice high-end, high-performance video processors to help dial in the picture on a projector or any video system for that matter. And we wanted to take a couple of sessions here to talk to you a little bit about what Lumagen's all about, the different products, the reason why you'd want to get a Lumagen processor. And then on our second part of this series, we will get a little more technical. Jim will show us some of the pieces of equipment. We'll look at some menus and things like that. So as we're talking today, guys, if you have any questions specifically for Jim, or if any questions come up as we're chit-chatting, feel free. I've got the question box right in front of me, so don't be shy. Let those questions roll in. So with that being said, it looks like we may already have one question. And oh, Joey Peacock just says hi, and he is pumped about hearing from Jim. So hi, Joey. Great,
Thanks.
great. So Jim, let's start from scratch, man. What's Lumagen all about? Why did you guys start your company? What are you guys doing over there?
Okay, great. Well, Lumagen, amazingly enough, now is 18 years old. I can't believe that time has passed so fast.
It's
We
old enough
started
to
the company back in the very end of 2001. The little anecdote is I had a funeral to go to on September 10th, and I told my wife then, my then wife, that we were going to start. I was going to start the company on the next day, which happened to be September 11th, 2001. So didn't get a lot done, but for this, I remember the day we started the company.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we started out with video processors because I had bought at the time, as it was a Dwin HD 700,
Oh, wow.
7-inch CRT projector, built a little theater. And really the only video processor that really did a decent job was the Ferrugia
Mm-hmm.
5000, which was $25,000. Being a crazy engineer, I said, hey, I can do better for a lot less.
Sure.
And that's how come Lumagen started, is I got a burr up my saddle to do that. So we had the original Vision series, which was analog only, SDN,
Mm-hmm.
HD out. And then we had the Vision DVI, which went up to 1080i in, and then DVI out. And then we started in 2007, we started with the Radiance XD, which it's interesting, I still get calls from people for support on the Radiance
That's
XDs.
funny.
Yeah, it's great. Hey, I'm glad it's still working for you.
Yeah, no kidding, right?
Yeah, so we had that. We had a number of generations. We had the XD, XE with added HD audio. Then
Mm-hmm.
we had the XS, and we had the Mini for the less cost version. Then we did the
Mm-hmm.
2000 series, which was 1080 in and up to 4K 30 out. And then we did the 2100 series, which is 2K in. Did I say 10K? 2K in, 1080 in, and up to 4K 60 out, 9 gigahertz. And then back in 2015, we introduced the Radiance Pro, which is 4K in, 4K out. And since then, we've been doing a lot of enhancements. The really big advantage we have is we use a field programmable gate array. And
Mm-hmm.
what you can do with that is you can completely change your hardware algorithms from scratch if you want to. Now, obviously, practically, that doesn't make any sense, but we can add, for example, when we introduced this, HDR video didn't really exist. There was no
Right.
HDR sources. And so since then, we've been working on that. We're able to add tone mapping. That was static tone mapping. Then we now have
Mm-hmm.
added dynamic tone mapping, and now we've added adaptation of
Mm-hmm.
dynamic tone mapping and stuff, to the point where I have a little slide set I'll show, but someone in the movie industry, a producer, has told us that it basically better than his professional stuff, and basically in a different league with any other product that will do that for consumers.
So Jim, what can these processors do? So imagine, you have somebody who builds a nice theater room, the walls are the right color, the acoustics are done well. It's a really nice theater. And somebody like me comes in and calibrates it. It's looking pretty good. Why would somebody want to take a Lumagen and put it into that system? What's that product going to do for them to make it step up to that next level?
Well, that almost sounds like an intro for my slide set. You want me to go to
Jim,
that?
hey, there we go.
You have to tell me how to share my screen
Yeah,
here.
let me make you a presenter, and you should be able to share your screen right
Yeah,
now.
show my screen. Okay,
And there it
and
is.
you got it? Great. So
Yeah,
then
so
there's,
real quick, for you guys and girls who are watching live, you can change the size of Jim's screen. So if you wanted to make my camera and Jim's camera smaller and see his screen bigger, there is a slider bar on your screen, so you can move that, however you feel comfortable. If you're listening in on the webinar as a recording, unfortunately, you cannot do that. So with that being said, Jim, cool. Let's get into it.
okay, very good. So I tried to change the slide set. I have a sales slide set. So if you're a dealer, we can go into more details later. This is kind of a high level overview. What's the Radiance Pro? Why would you want one? And so that was a great introduction
Thanks.
for it.
Yeah.
um, so really, the best short answer I have is you want to see what the director intended. We are very, very keyed to reference standard video. So
Hmm.
we're not trying to, do enhancements that generally make the picture worse. But, we typically don't want you to do those. Maybe some subtle enhancements could help, but we want to reproduce the scene as the producer in the post studio would be seeing it on his reference Dolby Vision projector.
Right.
We do concentrate more on projectors than on television because televisions, if you have 700 nits, you don't need as good of dynamic tone mapping as you do for a projector. So we basically are doing that, and we have someone who's actually doing that comparison. Um, and so we want to show you what it's supposed to look like, correct, accurate video. That's the most important thing. And if you don't have a Lumagen and you do have a projector, you're not there. You need the Lumagen to get there.
Right. Right.
So what kind of talk to people is if you've got great audio. A lot of people know they want to got great speakers, and they spend a
Hmm.
ton of money on speakers and amplifiers and stuff. Well, if that's important, so is video. You want
Sure.
video, your observation of the scenes to be as good as you possibly can get it with this, minimize artifacts, maximize how accurate it is compared to what it's supposed to be. So we're trying to match it to a studio, and the the movie producer who does that for us actually says we are a extremely close match to what he sees on his studio when he looks at the movie. He's got access to the actual reference
Sure. He's looking at the real
content of the
thing.
movies, and then he does the consumer content, and then he says we're very, very close for that.
What's the saying? I've heard this many times over the years. I'm sure you have too, but is the good video makes the audio sound better. I've heard that so many
Yes,
times.
but it's
Yeah.
both ways. Good audio
Right.
makes the video look better. Good video makes
Exactly.
the audio sound better. So it's an immersive thing. It's like, Atmos is immersive.
Right.
If you have the correct video, it looks correct. You're not
Hmm.
seeing artifacts that kind of go, well, that wasn't supposed to be there. Then
Yeah.
then you've got an immersive video setup as well. So the Radiance Pro gives any projector the best video quality. Now, there
Hmm.
are certain projectors that are starting to add some dynamic, JVC and the RS2000, 3000.
Hmm.
We just did a press release with JVC talking about RS4500, and the best home system right now is a RS4500 and the Lumagen. Now,
Hmm.
there's a lot of other good projectors, but the RS4500 is an amazing good projector. It happens to be a year and a half ago the one I chose for the Lumagen demo theater, not knowing that they were interested in even kind of doing any kind of joint promotion. But it's an extremely good projector. But all the other brands, they don't really do tone mapping. They're one
Right.
size fits all. They'll use a 1D LUT to do a static, tone map, which first of all, you can't really use a 1D LUT mathematically. It's not correct.
Hmm.
And so, those times and stuff, they're just not really doing it correctly. And what we're trying to do is reference quality for that. So we have the best dynamic tone mapping. The Radiance Pro analyzes every frame, and now actually I didn't put it in my slide, but it actually analyzes the frames, every frame in zones, because
Hmm.
you need to do that to catch some subtle differences of when do I want to do a scene change, when do I not want to do a scene change. If you have a small explosion off in the corner, how does that affect the larger area and stuff? So it analyzes every frame of content in a zone-based method. It detects the scene cuts. The producer friend said it does a better job than his professional gear, in his opinion, and it just adjusts the transfer function, which is just the in to output for every scene, and then within the scene it makes adaptations. And so what was I thought I was going to say. I'll just go on. It adapts it within the scene, and it also gives the user some level of preference. So
Mm-hmm.
because it's a dynamic system, we actually have to, on the first frame of a new scene, we detect it, we figure out this is the first frame, but a scene can change throughout the
Mm-hmm.
scene and get brighter, it can get darker, and we have this thing called dynamic pad to say, okay, do you want it to be as bright as possible, or do you want to prevent any chance of having any kind of clipping going on in the scene and that kind of stuff? And the
So you have a
users can
choice.
adjust for that. We have a desaturation control if you want certain scenes, like Mad Max Fury Road, 28 minutes, 29 seconds, if I remember correct. It has an explosion, and that explosion on the disc is burnt orange, but
Right.
in real life, you might see a little bit more yellow in it. So you can adjust that kind of stuff. You basically, it's good enough now with dynamic tone mapping. You really only have to set the max light. You set that based on a trade-off between how bright your images are going to be and how saturated the colors are going to be. You can turn it up and down, and you can even adjust it and see how that's going to work.
So it sounds like the processor is doing a lot of the heavy lifting in this case, so that the projector doesn't. Is that fair to say?
Exactly. So we say we output HDR in an SDR container. When I first said that we're doing this, I had several people say, you can't do that. But if you understand the math, it's just math. So basically, I have some other slides to talk about it, but basically, if the source of the real world is what's in linear gamma, and if the
Mm-hmm.
output's in linear gamma, everything in between, it's just math. You
Right.
know, we can do it, or the projector can do it. We do it better than the projector, so we can output it in SDR. And kind of an unsung advantage of doing this is you can actually calibrate your white levels, because in a projector at 100 nits, if you're in HDR mode, you can't calibrate the white levels very accurately,
Right.
because
It's
it's
too
going to
much.
clip
Too
way
bright.
before you
Yeah.
get to 10,000 nits in HDR
Sure.
base. So we are doing what's called grading on every scene and on every frame. So it's like you had a professional studio post grader sitting there
Yeah.
dialing the knobs on every frame of your
That's awesome.
movie to
And that's
optimize it.
on the fly, every frame,
Every
as you're
frame,
watching the
yes.
content. That's so cool. Very cool.
So basically, and I've said this before, but no other DTM is even in the same league. And this is by someone who actually does this for a living for
Mm-hmm.
a major studio. Sorry, I can't say who, can't say which studio, but he is very, very impressed with what we have. He's actually helped us. He would point out things to me. He'd point out things that no one else on the world ever noticed, and say, "Okay, I'll say I'll fix it. You know, we'll get it.
Oh
We'll get
yeah.
that fixed," kind of thing.
Sure.
And then, of course, there's Chris Deering from Deep Dive AV.
Yeah.
He's been instrumental in helping us tune our tone mapping and our dynamic tone
That's
mapping.
excellent.
So,
Now, what I've seen in my experience out in the field calibrating is that a lot of folks will use the Lumagen not only for all the great calibration things that we're talking about, but because of the scaling and the uh, mainly the upscaling and stuff like that, especially. So we're not only looking at color and grayscale and things like that, but you guys are also putting in superior scaling and doing some really interesting things with aspect ratios. So yeah, the high end systems that I've seen with the Lumagens in them have all been really fun to play with.
well, thanks. Dealers who know Lumagen say they won't put a projector in without a Lumagen in
Without
front of
one,
it, or at least they don't want to. I mean,
right?
sometimes they have to due to budget constraints. And one of the things I'll talk a little bit about is, if you are a dealer selling a home theater, you've got a video budget, and if it's big enough, you take the Lumagen, you put it there first, and then you spend the rest of the money. I'll talk a little bit about that, but
That's a good way to
we
look at it.
often see a lower price projector with a Lumagen look better than a much more expensive projector without.
Totally makes sense.
So you mentioned scaling. So we have what
Hmm.
we call no ring scaling. And there's some things I want to do to make it better. I know we can make it better, but we've been spending the last 2 years on HDR tone mapping.
Right.
And so right now, by the way, I kind of alluded to it, but we have this field programmable gate array.
Hmm.
We can dramatically change our algorithm, which we are doing. We're HDR, we are. So one example I don't normally mention, but for example, the dynamic tone mapping block is in floating point. And we never thought we would be doing floating point because we didn't need to do it before. So we can do those architectural changes.
Hmm.
Um, they're a little bit more difficult than programming a processor, but they're very efficient, and we can do pretty much anything we want to do for this video. And we're in the process of working on improving the pipeline. We already have, I think, really good precision, but we want to make it even better. And
Great.
so the front end of the pipeline is 10 bits, the back end of the pipeline is 12 bits or more,
Hmm.
sometimes up to 20 some bits, or in floating
Wow.
point. And then we're going to make the entire pipeline at least 12 bits. Now, I'm not sure you're even going to see that, but we want to be, if we have 10-bit source, we want to process it with at least a couple extra bits of precision.
Totally.
And so we're working on going to 12 bits for the front end of the pipeline, which is 10, and then all the calibration is currently 12 to 20 or floating point. Um, so we have the no-ring scaling, which experts uh, are telling us is the best. We actually have had it tested on this Tektronix $200,000 tester, which I'll probably mention more, but it actually compared to another product that's out there, a freebie thing, but and our scaling was judged by the Tektronix, which takes 4K, uses offline technology, which is really good at downscaling, and then compares the upscaled image between two products or gives it a score, and the
Hmm.
Lumagen scored the best doing that. So the no ring scaling gets rid of artifacts, and for those who are experts in video, it gives the best video.
Is it looking at it like per pixel and trying to determine,
Yeah, it's
what
doing
to, what
visual
to do with the
correlation
pixel?
of what's the signal to noise ratio differences. I don't know their algorithms, but this is what they're
Right.
doing. Signal to noise ratio differences between and any kind of content difference by correlation
Hmm.
between the upscaled image and the original image, and
Got
trying
it.
to find the closest match.
Got it.
So, and I will say offline scaling can do better than we can do because we're doing it in real time. We have to process every pixel in real time. If you
Sure.
have some algorithms that take like, it might do, hours per frame, you can do some advanced algorithms that just aren't practical in a real time environment. So
Sure.
it it's really a very good indicator that Tektronix, and it also does HDMI testing for like jitter
Hmm.
and for noise levels on the signals to keep them low. And the Lumagen, he actually measured it and said the Lumagen has one of the lowest or the lowest jitter of any HDMI product that he's tested. And we're
Nice.
working on improving that. We want a reference quality not only from the picture processing point of view,
Hmm.
but from a refined electrical design. So we're not adding a lot of noise into the system, which actually affects DILA type of products.
Ah.
Um, because that noise from the source can actually get in and add noise to your images. Um, so we do the scaling for SDHD up to UHD, but one thing that people don't really realize, if you have an anamorphic screen, there's lots of scaling involved in getting the 4K image to fit that screen, depending up to
Sure.
16 by 9, and whether it's 235, 240, 2.0 now being
Hmm.
popular, Netflix 2.2. There's different aspect ratios, so we deal with all of that. So we will adjust the image appropriately whether the aspect ratio of your screen is 1.1 or 2.5, but
Hmm.
typically we're seeing most screens now for home theaters, we're focusing on projection-based or LED wall-based systems,
Right.
and they're typically doing 240 screens and stuff.
Yeah. I've seen more and more in the past couple of years, at least. More and more people are doing a widescreen and then doing some kind of masking or something, or doing something like what exactly what you're talking about right here.
Mhm. Yes, yes, and we do that, and we have this image-based auto aspect, which I think I talked about in a future slide here. So another thing we do is studio quality colorimetry. There's two parts to that are very important to do. The most important is having a 1D LUT to do parametric grayscale to get your gray points. One of the things we're talking to the calibration companies is we have 21 points, it's parametric, we could move them down. And since I think they've done this for one TV, we can actually move the points around, and we're trying to get them to add that feature so that they can move. If they don't, then we have, basically black 5%, 10% levels, but we
Hmm.
can actually go in there manually. If you want to, after the fact, you can tune it. You can move it down to 0.5%, 1%,
Wow.
1.5%. And so that you can tune near black, which is very important for HDR because there's so much more information near black. You want to get
Definitely.
all those colors correct. Um, Secondly, we have the 4900 point 3D LUT, and that gives you accurate colors throughout the color cubes. Light space, light illusions, light space, they talk about memory colors, and that's very important. Where if I see Coke red or the American flag, I know what color that red is supposed to be.
Sure.
And if it's not right, then I will say, hey, that's not right. And
Hmm.
you can actually work on that calibration. Flesh tones are very, very important. And
Yes.
if your projector's not accurate, you need a 3D LUT to correct it. On the plus side for projectors nowadays is like JVCs and even Sony's, I think, are pretty accurate out of the box. They're not as accurate as you can get them, or maybe
Right.
you want them, but it's not like 10 years ago where they were completely out of
They're
whack
whack.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
you really had to calibrate.
Right.
So you have 8 CMS memories. We automatically detect SDR or HDR source, so you can switch
Hmm.
between those automatically. We output either an SDR 2020 for HDR. You can do that in SDR. If you have SDR content and you want to eliminate at least one source of an HDMI restart to your projector, tell the Lumagen to convert 709 to 2020. We can do that.
Sure.
Or P3, P3D65 white point. A little different than DCI, but it is what a lot of projectors can do. So you can set the Lumagen to output P3 if the projector supports it correctly.
Right.
And
Right.
so we have these different memories. You can have a day mode, a night mode, a sports
Hmm.
mode. Sports mode, a lot of people want to bump, take the gamma down from like a 2.2, 2.4 down to a 1.9, 2.0. So
Hmm.
it really pops off the screen for sports. If that's what they want to do, we can support that. You have a different
Sure.
memory. You manually select, I want sports mode kind of a thing. You can do that kind of stuff if you've got a good calibrator, but even
Hmm.
not, it doesn't take that much to set some of these different things up. Um, and then it works with major calibration software programs. So is this the right kind of level that we're doing? I
Oh
could
yeah.
answer any
Definitely.
questions.
There's a couple of questions that actually came in while you were just chit chatting
Okay,
there.
all right.
Somebody had asked, and Ladislav, if you want to maybe clear this up a little bit, he says he's talking about setting nits for the tone mapping in the Lumagen. That might be a little. You might cover that, Jim. So let's
Well,
wait to the
I,
end on
I
that
don't
one.
actually, I was keeping it a higher level than that, but our recommendation is if you know the nits max of your projector,
Right.
you typically are going to set it to 4 to 5 times that max light. And then
Hmm.
for the low ratio, there's a value we have to call it low ratio. It's historic. It made sense at the time. It's not what I would call it today, but you
Hmm.
want it to have a low ratio that effectively gives your low dark scene brightness at 1x your projector, maybe 1.5 in that range. So if you
Yeah.
know the nits are 100, you want your low max light, so to speak, that's set by low ratio to be
Hmm.
equal to your projector's capabilities, and your high max light, because you could set it equal to your projector's capabilities, but then we're going to clip much sooner than if you adjust it higher. One of
Sure.
the things that people don't understand is the human eye is very, very adaptive. And they're saying, how can you have HDR on a projector that only has 100 nits? Well,
Hmm.
the human eye only has, in what I'm hearing in the rough numbers, 100 to 1 contrast ratio on a given scene. And we have some scenes, one scene in Black Hawk Down has over 200,000 to 1 contrast ratio in the scene.
Wow.
And they have content that is at 0.02 nits and even a little below that
Whoa.
you want to see. And so that's a
Sure.
very difficult thing. You can't put 200,000 to 1 and have the human vision. If you put that background as bright as it should be, um, you're only going to see that. You're not going to see any of the detail. And so that's one of the things the dynamic tone mapping works on, is to adjust it. But in the projection based system, we're able to do that and not blow your eyeballs out like a bright TV might for that scene where that background is really truly at
Hmm.
2000 nits if you had a 2000 nit TV, and that 0.02 nit face is just completely washed out because you can't see anything. We have
Right.
the ability to, like, okay, we're going to adjust and basically grade this scene so that you get to see the detail that you want to see and it's not all washed out.
Gotcha. Hartmut just asked, and I believe you may have addressed this one already, but Hartmut asks, will Lumagen work in 10-bit in HDR? And I think you already hit that one.
Yes, yeah. So
Yeah,
basically, if it's HDR and you're sending it to us as 422, it's 12 bits coming in, so that's
right,
10
right,
bits. We process it right now, it's 10 bits in the front end, and then it's 12 bits as we go back out. So
coming out.
in the
Yeah,
front end, since there's really generally no processing going on, if you're watching the movie, it's 10 bits in, nothing happens, it goes out into the calibration at 12 plus bits. And so we're at least the minimum resolution of HDR all the way through the pipeline. One thing I do point out, and this is kind of off this topic, but the Lumagen has dithering on its output. And what that dithering does, its human visual system basically is kind of averaging out low level noise in an image. And that's what dithering does. It adds a little bit of low level noise. So people ask me, do I want 18 gigahertz output or 9 gigahertz output? And
right,
first of all, for 24 hertz movies, there's no difference. And
right.
18 gigahertz output cards that we have faster edge rates, which are a better test of what the quality of your cables and your input of your
Hmm.
projector are if you set it that way. But really, it stresses those more than a 9. And in my testing, at 24 hertz, there's no difference. And in fact,
Right,
if anything, 9 is going to have a lower bit
sure.
error rate because it's a slower signal. If the projector has any issues, it's going to receive that signal better. But even at 4K 60 HDR content, we put some scenes that we actually initially used to show that our dithering wasn't quite good enough yet. And then now we've actually improved those very tough scenes so that 8-bit output dithered on the Lumagen looks to me on my RS4500 JVC identical. I can't see any difference to the 12-bit 422 output. So
Wow,
from sources, you really need to have all those 10 bits because they don't do any dithering, they don't do anything. And in fact, you
sure.
really want to do it, if you're going to do the dithering, you want to do it at the very end of the pipeline. You don't want to do anything to the image until the very, very last moment, right before you send it out to the screen effectively. And
It
that's what we're
it
doing. We're acting as the processor for the projector.
I'm so glad you just brought that up because I've been in some systems where people are using the Lumagen as the switch itself. So instead of using like the AVR to switch HDMI, the all the sources come into the Lumagen. Lumagen goes out to the projector, and another output goes to the AVR. So the AVR is not doing any switching at all, which is great. But then I also
Yep.
see some cases where the sources do go to the AVR, and then everything comes out to the Lumagen, and then the Lumagen goes off to the projector. So is there kind of a rhyme or reason behind the system design, or is it just kind of per every case is a little different?
There's two different cases. If you want to see the on-screen display of your audio processor, a lot of the high-end ones don't even have that anymore. But if you do, then you put the audio processor in the
You have
path of
to.
your light path, or you put it basically. We have people who take the output of the audio processor and send it to a second input on the projector, so they just switch to it if they want to see that.
Oh, I see. Good
And so
call.
that can work. The advantage of having the Lumagen do the switching is switching speed, one.
Yes.
And then basically we can program for certain clients. A lot of clients don't really have a problem watching 24 hertz movies at 60 hertz. For those clients, the Lumagen can program our output, and then you can program your sources to always output 60 hertz. And then we
Hmm.
don't have to restart. If you set the Lumagen up right, even going from SDR to HDR, we don't have to do an HDMI restart. And so instead of 20, 30 seconds for some
Yeah,
projectors locking
I've seen it.
on,
Yep.
we switch in 3 seconds. And in RS4500 here, what I have, if I restart that output, I've got 17 seconds before I see a picture.
Hmm.
I can set it up. Now, I actually like watching movies at 24 hertz. So I can set it up though. I can start the movie if I had 60 in and 60 out all the time and see a picture in 3 seconds or
Wow,
so.
that's awesome.
So it's really quick. And even going from SDR to HDR, we don't have to restart because we can set the output for both to SDR 2020, for example, and we're
Hmm.
not having to change the color space, which would have forced an output restart. Um,
So
Go ahead.
less conversions, and it's holding the handshake, and that's what makes it go so fast.
Exactly, and we don't know if the audio processor, historically, audio processors damage the video. We
Oh
have
gosh.
people visually see
Yes.
that, why does it look bad? I'm going through my Lumagen. Well, you're giving us garbage
Right.
from the audio processor. So
Yep.
going to us, better switching, we can keep all the sources active. If you use 9 gigahertz inputs or one per input card for the 18 gigahertz, and in fact, that's why we say if you have all 18 gigahertz on an 8 input box, you start with 1, 3, 5, and 7, so they're all staying active. That'll help your switching speed for those sources.
Jim, Dan just asked, how about 72 out fixed instead of switching between 24 and 60? That way there might not be any judder.
Um, the 72 output would not work for 60 hertz because you would have judder there. Um, we can program the Lumagen to output 72 hertz. A lot of products
Hmm.
won't support 72 hertz, especially 4K products. A lot of
Yeah.
the older 2K products did support 72 hertz, and we did support it, and we do support it now. So I'm not sure if we support 4K at 72 hertz or not. Actually, I haven't been asked that question.
Yeah.
It would have to be within the limits of the bandwidth of the chips, which would be 9 gigahertz or 18. So I don't think at 4K we would support 72 hertz at this time.
Joey was curious. You're obviously doing a lot of partnerships with other companies and doing some consulting and stuff. It sounds like you worked with JVC recently. Have you guys partnered up with any other specific manufacturers to kind of land all this stuff home with them?
Um, I wish.
Yeah.
JBC, this was fairly recently, and we hadn't really. I mean, we were friendly with a number of manufacturers for
Hmm.
projectors, but I had looked around, and I've known the JBC guys for a while, years, and I just decided that the best projector for us was the JVC RS4500,
Hmm.
but it wasn't really any kind of partnerships. And then recently they said, hey, let's do this press release because we have this great combination, which I really do think the 4500 and the Lumagen make a great combination, but so does the
Sure.
RS3000 and the Lumagen, or the RS2000 and the Lumagen.
Yeah.
So and then the Sonys, you really need a Lumagen to make the Sonys, but they look good too. I'm not going to say anything negative about the other products,
Yeah.
but
Sure. Of course.
the JVCs just really fit well. We have a special feature where we can actually send the HDR flag to the JVC projector, but it doesn't turn on its tone mapping. It basically, you say still stay in 2.2, 2.4 gamma, and that way we can actually choose a different memory if you want to for SDR and HDR.
Nice.
Less needed. In fact, right now, I think I'm using one memory. I'm using both the same mode because really it's 2.4 gamma for HDR, and I'm just using that for SDR, and it looks really good.
Excellent. Excellent. Cool. I think you probably have a few more slides. Yeah.
Absolutely,
Cool.
absolutely here.
Let's keep going. No new questions yet, but guys, feel free, keep those questions rolling in.
Okay, so I think I don't think I covered this one. We support anamorphic without a lens. People say, do I need an anamorphic lens?
Right.
My
I hear
answer
that
is,
all the
do you
time.
need more light output?
Yeah. Right.
Do you have
Right.
a 240 screen and you don't have enough light output? Now, I have a 14-foot diagonal on the RS. I have a Stewart Studio Tech 130, 14-foot diagonal, 13-foot wide about. So it's 1.3 gain with a 3000 lumen projector, and I wasn't really thrilled with having in the 70s for my nits output.
Right.
So I did end up getting a Paladin DCR lens from Panamorph, um, and put that in, and I'm now at high 80, 88 was what I measured on light output, which got me to the point where I'm pretty happy in mid laser at 88 nits. And if I
Hmm.
really want more light, I can turn it to high laser. But in our room with the projector in the room, the mid laser worked out very well.
So
So anamorphic lens is about light output.
in that case, using the Lumagen and the lens, you're taking advantage of the entire chip, right? In the projector.
You are, but there's a kind of a myth that gives you a higher resolution image.
Hmm.
So the highest resolution image you're going to get out of a projector is if you don't have to do any scaling of the source to the projector,
Yes.
and
Yes.
that's without the lens. 240 content on a 240 screen comes in. We don't have to turn scaling on because the output's 3840, exactly the same height,
Sure.
and basically scaling automatically turns off in the Lumagen, and that's going to give you your best resolution. Now,
Hmm.
if you do have a lens, the difference is very, very small. You're mostly going to see the difference on test patterns,
Right.
on-off patterns and stuff. With scaling on, it's very difficult to scale an on-off pattern. And so you
Hmm.
really can't use that as a judge of, gee, how good's the image? You really actually have to look at uh, content that follows Nyquist sampling theory. Sorry to throw in a
No,
couple
that's
of
okay. No, no
engineering
worries.
concepts, but we have to sample. Any scaling is going to soften the image. It's just mathematically part of the process because you have to filter it. So the best, sharpest image is going to be a 240 content on a 240 screen with scaling turned off. The difference is very subtle though, and I'm very happy with the anamorphic lens, knowing that I'm scaling all the time. It for regular content, I really don't see any problems whatsoever with that.
Okay, good, good. You might have this coming up, so stop me if you've heard this one. But I've had some systems that I've worked on recently where they have a 235 screen and they watch a lot of 16:9 content and they really like the nonlinear stretch. So we can either talk about that now or maybe you have that later in the slide.
Well, actually, I'm glad you asked that because I updated the slides today and I didn't think to put
Ah, well, hey,
nonlinear
here we go.
stretch in there. So
Here we are.
I'll mention that. So in the scaling process, some people want to fill their screen, especially if they don't have masking. So that's kind of the
Hmm.
key. If you have masking, you actually watch in the native aspect. So the Lumagen has a programmable feature for nonlinear stretch. So you choose how wide a center section of your screen is and how much
Hmm.
linear stretch you want in that center section, and then how much cropping at the top and the bottom if you want any cropping at the top and
Right.
bottom. And then we basically calculate and stretch the image out to fill the width of the 235, 240 screen. And some people really like it. I don't
Hmm.
particularly like it. I don't use it. I've tried it, and I've tried to give it a good thing, and it's not, in many cases it's not bad, but I just
Yeah.
prefer, I'd rather have the native aspect ratio. But it's a feature a lot of people really, really like,
Yeah.
and it is, if you're not trying to, if you're not really analyzing it, it looks very natural.
Right.
And a lot of people like it for sports, especially if
Hmm.
you got a sport where you're focusing on the guy with the ball in the
They're
middle of
looking
the
in the middle.
screen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So you can do a really good job of filling your screen if that's what you want to do.
Another question came in, and feel free, we can save this for the end. But it looks like somebody was mentioning that there may be some issues with Lumagen and Calman and 3D lookup tables. Does that ring a bell at all?
Okay, so Calman can do a good job on a 3D LUT on a Radiance in SDR 709 color space.
Hmm.
If you talk to them, they will say, yes, we need to improve our 2020 3D LUT calibration. And what we're actually telling people is they do a pretty good job in P3 from what we're being told by others. I
Hmm.
haven't done a lot of work on the Calman, um, but they can do it in P3. So if you have a P3 projector that can actually do a fairly good job in P3 like JVCs do, I'm not sure about
Hmm.
Sony's, but JVCs do, you actually calibrate to P3 and then the Calman can do a good job on the 3D LUT.
Right.
They have the new algorithm. I talked to LA over there a while back. They have the new algorithm, but integrating that into their flow is extremely complicated the way it
Really?
have to work. And
Yeah.
so they are working on this. They actually hired a color scientist to help them with all this. And I think they've
Hmm.
got the color science in pretty good shape from what last I talked to him. This was a while back. But they just hasn't gotten integrated for the 2020. Now, on the other hand, they do a perfectly fine job of measuring the 3D LUT. So you
Hmm.
can do your error. So you can do a color profile to see, do I really need to do a 3D LUT?
Yeah, you might not need it. Yeah, true.
And generally what we find is you really do need a 1D LUT. Every
Hmm.
projector out there can benefit from a 1D LUT that we are seeing. But the 3D LUT, um, especially since most colors, you won't know if it's not correct. So I talked about memory colors.
Yes. Yeah.
So if Coke red doesn't look red, you're going to notice it. But if that grass is a different shade of green, is that an error or is that just the way it's supposed to look? You don't
Yeah.
know. So
Hard to
so you
say.
can tolerate in many cases larger errors in the 3D color cube, and we're seeing in a lot of cases JVCs, and I think Sony's, although I don't know exactly, I might be wrong on that, are fairly accurate for the 3D LUT. When you do a profile for 3D
Sure.
for the color cube. So you may decide that, okay, CalMan can't do the 2020. I'm just going to do a 709 3D LUT because it does a good job there. And I'm going to measure the 3D LUT for 2020. Oh, it's pretty good. And the problem with 2020 comes, I think, in a great part of the projectors can't do 2020. And so you
Yes.
actually have to do kind of a roll off in some way and treat the places where it can't do it differently than 709, which projectors are pretty good now at doing 709. So I don't know, that's probably a longer answer than you wanted,
No,
but
that's
you
okay.
can use
And
CalMan, it works fine. I typically am using Lightspace,
right.
partly because I own a license to Lightspace and I have
Yeah.
to call up LA and say, hey, send me a temporary license for doing classes and training and
Sure.
stuff for CalMan. CalMan's, I mean, I like CalMan's user interface.
Hmm.
It's very good. I like Lightspace, does a really good job. They have the new thing called Color Space. I haven't gotten
Yes.
it yet, but I'm told it does even better job on 3D LUTs for 2020 than Lightspace did.
So Steve and I, Steve Shaw and I from Light Illusion, we did 2 sessions with him, like we're doing with you, Jim. And he was showing this. He was showing this all this stuff that was still in beta at the time, but it looked really it looked really cool. Um,
Yes, yeah,
and for I think it was Ladislav who asked the question about CalMan specifically. Just FYI for you guys who are CalMan users, they just released the new 2020 R1 version just days ago. So if you're a little bit behind on your CalMan software, you know, this may be one of these things that they have improved in the new version. So, you know, check for an update. Maybe
do,
they've improved
do
that.
you know, does that have the 2020 LUT improvements?
That I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure, but perhaps we can find
Okay,
out. We can dig
yeah,
in.
yeah,
No big
find
deal.
out, find out.
You know. Okay,
Okay,
cool. I think we're
so
caught
I
up on
think,
questions, so let's keep going.
okay, very good. So if you have a lens, we support that. If you don't have a lens, we support that. We have an image-based auto aspect. It works really good with digital sources. If you had an old VCR tape, you know, the noise in the
Oh
image
yeah,
kind of screws it up.
sure.
But for digitally, I have like my Kaleidoscope Strato, which is what I
Hmm.
watch movies on mostly. Um, Set up. So two things I do for that. I set when I select my Strato, since I'm going to watch a movie, I tell the Lumagen, go ahead and switch to 24 hertz. So I pay the 17-second time it takes it to lock on when I
Hmm.
switch to that source. A nice little trick if you want to do that.
Sure.
And then I have image-based auto aspects. So when I start the movie, it goes from the 16:9 splash screen. Basically, it goes starts the movie, and then about 2 seconds later goes, you know, out to the full 240 aspect and does the correct control for that. And so
Hmm.
that's really nice. The Lumagen can actually report to the control system, I just detected the aspect ratio is this. Oh, I just detected the aspect ratio is this. And there's other things we can do. We have this auto report feature, so the control
Yeah.
system, if you are using masking, we could report that if you want to do it that way.
What happens in current projection systems with movies, especially by folks like Christopher Nolan, where part of the movie's in 16:9, part of the movie's widescreen. Do you
Excellent,
have
excellent
any?
question.
Do you have any? I mean, here's where the question comes from. I've calibrated tons of projectors. I've worked on a bunch of theater rooms, but I've never lived with a projector. And now that I have been living one for a few months now, all these questions keep popping up. And here's one, and you've probably
Yes.
heard this question a million times. So I'm watching The Dark Knight. The IMAX shots are 16:9. The regular part of the movie's not. How do we deal with the changing aspect ratios?
Okay, well, that's actually a good case. The image-based auto aspect is not intended for that because it has hysteresis in time to make sure before it changes that it's really the new aspect ratio. So you don't want to have it on for Dark Knight. In fact, we have a sticky override on the auto aspect. So when you start to see the aspect ratio change, which I think is a terrible idea,
Yeah,
of
right.
course, no one asked me, and it is what it is. So I just, when I start Dark Knight, if I were watching it here, I would hit my 235 button knowing I don't want that to happen. And I just
Yeah,
watch everything in 235.
and just let it rip. Yeah,
Yeah, so I mean, some
interesting.
people might like it, but, and I know why they did it, because they had this big screen, they wanted to use the 16:9 aspect ratio, but in my opinion, which is not a professional opinion, this is my opinion, is
Mhm.
they should have shot all the movie in one or the other. I don't
Right.
think it makes any sense to switch in the middle of the movie. Very distracting, pulls you
Hmm.
right out of the movie.
So what you're doing then, and if you're watching that entire movie in 235, and you've got your lens, and you've got your Lumagen, when you do see those big IMAX, those tall IMAX shots that are 16:9, you're fitting in the 235.
They're
without
cropping,
distortion.
and if
Oh, it's
you have it
cropping.
set to 235, that anything out of the 235, 240 is going to get cropped. So you basically don't see the image get taller all of a sudden.
Got it. Got it. Got it.
Now, if you have
Interesting.
auto aspect on and didn't hit auto aspect, and I have a 240 screen, when the Lumagen detects 16:9, it's going to switch the aspect, zoom it down so that it fills the height of the screen at 16:9 and put black bars on the left and the right.
Mhm.
And then when it goes back to 235, it'll do that same thing, but not instantly.
Right.
And so it's really not intended for that because it's going to be distracted. You've got two distractions instead of one.
Yeah. Right. We made it worse. Yeah.
So I just hit 235. If I have a 240 screen, I want to watch everything full screen, and
Sure.
that's 240. So I just
Fair enough.
don't want to see that stuff in the 16:9. Now, if you have a 16:9 screen, maybe you just leave it the way it is, and it's either shorter or taller depending on
Right.
what part of the movie it is.
Got it. Got it. Okay, cool. No new questions, so let's keep going.
All right. Okay, so this is a pretty short presentation, but often a feature you need in your theater cannot be done without a Lumagen. We have a lot
Mhm.
of features. In fact, some of our features were done for a single theater in the entire world because a dealer called and said, I've got this really weird problem. Can you do it in the Lumagen? And we don't do this all the time, so don't expect necessarily that your problem is going to get fixed within 2 hours.
Mhm.
But he said we need to do this. I don't remember exactly what that feature was, but can you do it? And I'm only here today. I
Yeah, right,
flew
right.
in.
Yeah.
I'm only here today. Can you do it? And so 2 hours later, we sent him a release that had that feature in that he needed to make everything right in the theater.
Mhm.
The Lumagen is all about everything being right. And so aspect ratios right, sizing's right, great scaling, of course, but all the geometry set up, the aspect ratio, how I want to deal with things. For example, on my 240 screen, we have this image base or this output aspect per input aspect. So I tell, for everything that's 235 or less, I tell the Lumagen everything that's there is 235. The screen is 235, and then for 240, I said it's 240. And the reason
Yeah.
I do that is that I want everything to be the best possible. And by doing that, especially if you had like a 3840 wide screen, that's the
Mhm.
contents 3840. In that case, if I didn't have a lens, and I wasn't outputting 4096, then I would be 3840 in wide in both cases, and I could at least turn off horizontal scaling. So we can do all sorts of little tricks like that. Well, if
Mhm.
I'm going to scale, I only want to scale 1 dimension instead of 2 dimension. Well, that's a feature you can use for that. So we can do this kind of stuff. Very, very common to have issues. If a lot of high-end clients have a DCI projector which don't
Mhm.
have vertical keystoning, and we
Right.
have it in the Lumagen because of that. Now, I tell people don't use it if you don't
Yeah.
have to because it's
Yeah.
downscaling 4K, and you don't really
Right.
want to downscale if you can avoid it. But there's a lot
Mhm.
of features we have for unique instances. And then
Excellent. Excellent.
when I'm talking to dealers, which I believe everyone here is a dealer, I can tell you that you should include the radiance in the bundle. Of course, that's my biased opinion, but
Mhm.
uh, in the bundle, so you're going to be able to set up the system correctly and have the best video performance. I can tell you that I often get a call from a dealer begging for a special deal because
Mhm.
they failed to put a Lumagen in the bid,
Oh yeah.
and they promise something to the customer that they can't do without a
Mhm.
Lumagen. And so I say, I'm eating this. What can you do for me?
Right.
And so put it in initially. And I think I mentioned it earlier, but if you have a video budget, put the Lumagen in first, not
Yeah.
last. Put it in
Right.
first, and then what you have left for the screen and for the projector, then you can budget that. And you may want to give up an anamorphic lens, which I would say the choice would be the Lumagen over the lens. You may want to use both. And then
Mhm.
masking versus non-masking. I chose a non-masking 240 screen because the JVC RS4500 and of course the RS3000 have really good contrast
Mhm.
ratios. And so when I watch a 16:9, I'm not really bothered because there's really not a lot of light out on the sides to things. So I don't have masking. I save that money. I did spend money on a lens, and so you can, say for this system I want to do this, for this system I want to do that. If
Sure.
you're buying a projector a very popular projector, RS2000 has very good contrast ratio, and then you put it with the Lumagen, and you have a price less than an RS3000, and you've got an amazing picture.
Yeah.
Very, very good combination.
These different scenarios being different for every installation is is interesting, and this is why I always harp so much on, before you even think about what you're going to do with the system and screen size and what projector, these questions that these solutions that you're bringing up, we only know those solutions from asking the customer the right questions. What type of content do you like to watch? Where do you like to sit? And things like that. Because the way you might build a system for somebody who watches sports all the time that has a pool table in the room and it's like a man cave room versus a dedicated theater like what you're in right now, I mean, that's two completely different use cases. So you've got to sit down with the customer and interview them and figure out beforehand, so you don't end up in that situation that you just described where somebody calls you out last minute and says, hey, we need to do this thing in an emergency.
Mm-hmm.
So for the dealers out there, I'll always stress, spend a lot of time sitting with your customer, asking them questions, finding out what they want and what their idea is of a good theater. And you can start to use things like Lumagens to fit their goals and what they want. So interview,
Excellent.
interview, interview, and ask questions. Ask questions.
And I think your sports versus movie is very, very good. So if you got a projector like a JVC RS3000, let's say, it's not as much light output as, say, a DLP light engine, like
Hmm.
Canon, like maybe some of the Epsons and stuff. But the Epsons don't have very good contrast ratio. So
Right,
if you've got a sports nut, the Epson might be the right projector. And then
right.
the Lumagen is going to give you the best HDR possible on that projector. Not going to
Hmm.
have the contrast ratio. Some dark movies are going to be, the black level is not going to be as good. But then you got a guy who watches mostly movies, an RS 2000, 3000, or a Sony 885, 995 could be the
Hmm.
right projector for them because it's got a better contrast ratio, and that's going to be better for HDR. And then the Lumagen is going to give you the best HDR and sports on that
Yeah.
projector. So the Lumagen can be ideal. It matches any projector to your screen in your room the
Right.
best it can. But
Hmm.
as Jason said, the projector you choose may be different for a sports person than for a movie person.
Right. Jim, what happens if somebody changes up their system or changes up their room? So maybe they have a Lumagen and maybe they have a system in one home where it is kind of a man cave situation, but then that customer moves into another home and he says, okay, well, in this home, instead of doing a man cave, I want to do a dedicated, nice, dark theater room. So is it just a matter at that point of just, setting everything back up in the new room and maybe just
Absolutely,
factory
yeah.
factory
Yeah,
reset the Lumagen and start over? Is that fair?
exactly. If you're moving the Lumagen, and we have people do that, or they'll change a projector from one projector to a newer one with maybe better contrast, better light,
Sure.
or better color gamut. And so the Lumagen is completely adaptable. You just do a factory reset and
Start
then
over.
start over. And one thing that kind of just brought to mind, is not really related, but you can back up your Lumagen settings. So if you install a Lumagen in a system, especially if you're going to do the same installation for another client later, you
Hmm.
download that configuration as a starting point, you upload it into the new Lumagen, and then you basically, you got a good starting point. And of course, if worst case, something happens to the Lumagen, we have some lightning strikes take out Lumagen from time to time.
Sure.
You basically, you get a new unit, you load that
Load it.
configuration, you don't have to spend the time to do the calibration or the setup.
That's excellent. You'd be up and running in 10 minutes probably.
Yeah, very quick. It's just a
That's
few
good.
minutes to do that.
What are you guys, we got about 5 minutes left, guys, to talk with Jim here. So if you have any other questions for him, feel free to let those questions come in. It does look like, oh, you got a couple more slides. Okay, cool. Let's
Well,
go through.
this is kind of, I think the last slide, I think. Well, maybe I got
Mhm.
two of these. So basically, I didn't talk much about LED walls, but we can program the Lumagen output resolution to match non-standard resolutions for LED walls. Because
Excellent.
they're so big and so expensive, we see a lot of 2540 by 1440 LED walls. So we can do the tone mapping for that. We can convert everything to 709, which is usually what they have for color space. We can do dithering because in the black level, they don't really do great for that. We can
Hmm.
send them the better image. And so whether it's projection or LED wall, you've got to have the Lumagen to get optimal picture quality. And I don't think anyone's going to argue with me on that. At least I don't have people arguing with me on
It
that.
hasn't happened yet.
So you can use said this, a less expensive projector with a Lumagen Pro, save money versus a more expensive projector and have a better image.
I
And
love it.
something I really like to highlight is we are FPGA based. It's completely reprogrammed. Someone said, "Oh, the Lumagen's a 5-year-old product." I said, "No, it's a week-old product because we just had a
Yeah,
new release."
sure. Yeah,
Because
no,
the hardware, people don't understand. You have your input HDMI. We do 4K 60 at 18 gigahertz. Our output's 4K 60 at 18 gigahertz. For 4K, you don't need any changes there.
right.
They go into the FPGA and it can do anything. We could completely change
Do
what we
whatever you
do. We
want.
could drop features, we could add features. We
Right.
still have a significant amount of room left in our FPGA, so we're planning on adding more features,
Hmm.
improvements, and stuff like that over time. Um, and so it's a brand new product. It's programmable. It's completely programmable.
I love that. And that's one of the things that we're so proud about here over at AV Pro and Meridio is that all of our stuff is FPGA as well, because same boat as you, man. If we need to make a change, we don't have to wait on other engineers and things like that. We can just do it on the fly. I love it. That's great.
Yep, yep.
Very
So,
good.
like in the old days, the Radiance, we added 3D. In back 2010, we basically, it took us 3 months to add 3D. We added
Hmm.
3D and kept going, and all our competitors went out of business.
Yeah,
And
right,
so,
right.
we kind of became the only real thing. The same thing now is we're doing dynamic tone mapping. We're doing
Hmm.
it better than anyone else, and we'll continue to improve it. We're continuing to look at special cases for DTM and improving those. We're looking at improvement in our precision, improvement in our scaling, improvement in
Hmm.
all aspects. So you don't have an obsolete product when you install it. You've got a living product that will get better over time.
That's a great feature. I have two more questions for you, and I think that'll get us right at our hour. Um, Number one, um, what are you seeing possibly maybe as a challenge? At this point, we've kind of got 4K and HDR pretty much figured out, and of course, as soon as we get that figured out, here comes a new standard. So, are you seeing some challenges already with HDMI 2.1 and 8K and the higher frame rates and things like that?
Well, that's a good question. You kind of get me on my soapbox about 8K. Um, and no offense to those who like 8K, but I say it's a waste of the entropy of the universe. Um, and I'm serious when I say that. I'm not, and that's not a tongue in cheek. It really is not the right way to spend the ergs available to us. Two questions is first of all, um, it doesn't make sense to transmit compressed video at 8K versus 4K. I tell people I'm sitting 12 feet from a 13-foot wide 4K
Hmm.
screen, and the pixel size is below human visual acuity.
Right.
So if I went from 4K to 8K, I really can't see that difference.
Hmm.
And I don't care what people say, you can't see the difference. It's below your visual perception. And you could talk about a little bit of oversampling or something. So
Yeah.
even in the projector, 8K is, if you're not sitting at quarter screen width, which unless you're a gamer,
Hmm.
8K could make sense for a gamer. I'll say that. It could
Yeah.
actually have baseband video, no compression. Maybe it makes sense for a gamer, but for video, for the projector, let's say we give them, okay, maybe there's a slight improvement because of the oversampling. Then we talk about sending video down a compressed link at 4K or 8K, you got
Hmm.
resolution that's beyond the capability of human vision system, but to compress 8K is going to give you more compression artifacts
Than if you
than
just
in
watch in
4K.
4K.
And in fact,
Yeah.
I would propose that if you did a double blind test, exactly the same compression algorithm for both 4K and 8K, one of two things would happen. One is you can't tell the difference, or the 4K looks better. And so stating that, I'm still looking at doing 8K because people are asking, can you do
Sure.
8K? It's just that I'm not sure we even want to. We may choose to not do it
Yeah.
because there's no really, in my opinion, other people may differ. There's no technical merit for sending 8K video down a compressed link. Doesn't make any sense. You're not getting a better picture, and you might get a worse picture. Uh,
Right.
and
That makes
so
sense when you put it like that with the compression. That does make some sense. It's so funny. This is such a hot topic, man. It's
Oh yeah, very hot topic. Now,
yeah.
if I'm talking to a gamer and I'm say he's sitting a foot from a 5-foot wide screen,
Yeah.
maybe 8K makes sense because he's got
Right.
baseband, there's no compression,
Yeah.
and maybe it could make sense. So that's the one use case that, but our clients are not that type of gamer typically. We did just
Sure.
add a low latency game mode, so we do want to
Oh,
support
cool.
gamers, but
Sure.
at 4K, what you really would want to do is you would basically have your uh, gaming engine render at 8K, scale it down to 4K, and
Hmm.
transmit it to 4K, And in that case, I really doubt you would ever see any difference between an 8K transmission on an 8K projector TV versus 4K transmission on a 4K projector TV,
Interesting.
given everything else being equal. It's not the
Hmm.
demo where the TV manufacturer dumbs down their old technology and enhances the crap out of their new technology
Right,
to show you
right.
how much better it is.
Hmm.
And they all do it. It's just, if you did a true apples to apples comparison, I don't believe you would see the difference with 8K.
Good. Interesting. Good, good. It looks
Now
like you,
we are looking
oh,
at it.
oh,
But
sure, sure, of
last
course.
thing, I have a couple testimonial slides.
Yep.
People talking about the Lumagen. I'll let you read that.
Yeah,
And we can make these slides available if you're interested. I didn't put any proprietary stuff that I
sure.
wouldn't want to get out. So
Good.
if you have any other questions other than that, I'm done.
Yeah, guys, we're right at our hour, so thank you so much. I do have one more question, and I love talking to guys like you about this. I know you mentioned your Kaleidoscape. Are you
Yes.
still buying physical media? You
Not
personally?
very often. I like some old movies, and so I
Sure.
do tend to buy uh, some old movies on the Blu-ray and discs and stuff. But other than
Good.
that, no, I'm using the Strato to download content that's at least as good as the disc content and
Good.
definitely better than streaming content.
Good. Good. Good.
I
Good.
still don't like watching streaming content because there's still cases where I see issues,
Yes.
and I'm fairly sensitive to that kind of stuff. It's a
Yes.
lot better. I mean, when we switched to 4K transmission, we shouldn't have for like a couple of years until people got to the 200 megabit, kind of range where
Right.
you could actually stream 4K content. But for example, Blu-ray HD movies are encoded about 35 megabits.
Right.
My understanding is streaming 4K is encoded about 40 megabits. Now,
Hmm.
the encoding is better, but you could have encoded the 2K at the better encoding scheme and got it to look even better.
Right.
And
Right.
so the problem is that the streaming devices are all about numbers. How many people can I support?
Right.
They're less about quality. So they want to say it's 4K, but they're not giving you the same quality as the Strato,
Yeah.
which the Strato, the Kaleidoscape guys, talk about. They get the mezzanine data, so they can actually put more data on the disk than is on a UHD disk. So
Interesting.
on the hard drive. So basically, since it's the
Yeah.
hard drive, they can have a variable size. They can put more, and in some places, like I guess I'm thinking in the Rise of Skywalker, that was one of the best looking things I've looked at on the Strato, and it just because they've got that extra data there, then you
Yeah.
can't get anywhere else.
I heard that that one looked really good, and please don't get mad at me, but I haven't seen it yet.
I
I haven't seen that
won't
one
give
yet.
away anything.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah,
Well,
no,
that's
it's a really good way to do it. I don't have any business relationship with Kaleidoscape. We do work with them. They have this co-star feature where you have a 4K player and a 2K player, and you marry them so you can see all
yeah.
the movies together called co-star. We have a special feature for that, but I don't have any relationship other than that with them.
Sure. No, that's great, guys. So, guys, I don't see any more questions that came in. Thank you so much for hanging out with Jim and I for an hour to talk out and nerd out on some video. One question came in about this being recorded. Yes, if you did miss it or had to jump in late, we'll get it uploaded to YouTube here in the next couple of days. Things like that. If you guys do have any other questions that maybe we didn't get to today, feel free to email Jim or email me, and I can get those questions to Jim. With that being said, Jim, thank you so much for your time. I know the next time that you and I meet, we haven't picked a date yet, but we'll get a little more technical and start looking maybe at some menus and some setup things like that. So guys, keep your eyes peeled for the dates on that. You can keep up with all of our webinars on the AV Pro Edge or the Meridio website. Of course, you can see all of our recorded sessions on the either the Meridio or the YouTube, the Meridio or the AV Pro Edge YouTube page too. So again, Jim, thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll talk to you next time.
Well, thank you, and thanks everyone for attending.
Absolutely. See you guys.